Mark Tedford has President Trump's endorsement. But an endorsement is not a voting instruction. District 1 deserves to know when Donald Trump would and would not get Mark Tedford's vote. An endorsement is not a voting instruction. Tedford now promises to fight alongside President Trump for an America First economy. But Congress is not the president's board of directors. District 1 is electing a representative. Before Trump endorsed him, Tedford sounded more independent. At a Bixby campaign event, he described himself as a pragmatic, business-oriented conservative and said the America First agenda was largely economic. Then the questions became specific. Tedford expressed concern about Trump's tariffs because of inflation and business uncertainty. He said birthright citizenship should not be overturned, and he opposed sending American ground troops into Iran. Those are not footnotes. Birthright citizenship is the clearest contradiction. Trump has continued trying to restrict automatic citizenship in specified cases. Tedford publicly said birthright citizenship should not be overturned. So if Congress is asked to reinforce a Trump restriction on birthright citizenship, how would Congressman Tedford vote? Would he vote according to the position he gave voters in Bixby, or would that change after receiving Trump's endorsement? Tariffs may protect American producers and encourage more manufacturing at home. But tariffs are also collected from American importers, and some of that cost can eventually be passed to businesses and customers. Tedford apparently understood the trade-off. Before receiving Trump's endorsement, he expressed concern about tariffs because of inflation and the uncertainty they create for businesses. This is where economic policy needs a kitchen table test. If President Trump proposes tariffs that Tedford believes will increase costs for Oklahoma businesses and families, will Congressman Tedford vote for them anyway? Don't just ask whether a policy carries an America First label. Ask what happens to the family paying the bill. Tedford says he wants to lower energy and regulatory costs and unleash American energy production. Fine. But what does American energy mean? Oklahoma produces natural gas, wind, and solar. Oklahoma wind is not a side issue. Wind supplies roughly 4 of every 10 Oklahoma kilowatt-hours. Nationally, planned utility-scale generating additions for 2026 are 51% solar, 28% battery storage, and 14% wind. That is 93% combined. So if a Trump policy makes a new Oklahoma wind or solar project more expensive while Tedford says his priority is reducing Oklahoma energy costs, which objective wins? Does Trump get Tedford's vote, or does Oklahoma? Tedford also told voters he opposed sending American ground troops into Iran. That may have little to do with grocery bills or teacher salaries, but it tells District 1 something important. Tedford apparently does have lines he will not automatically cross simply because Trump supports a policy. That is evidence in his favor. But that also means voters are entitled to ask where the other lines are. And Tedford's Oklahoma House record helps answer that question. On taxes, wages, school choice, Medicaid, and private markets, his record tells us more. Tedford prominently cites his conservative credentials, including his rating from the Oklahoma Council of Public Affairs, or OCPA. OCPA is a conservative free market policy organization that promotes free enterprise, limited government, individual initiative, personal responsibility, and strong families. OCPA gives Tedford a 91% score for 2026 and an 87% lifetime score. That is useful information, but it measures ideological consistency. It is not a report card on Oklahoma household income, school performance, or health outcomes. Tedford's record fits a familiar conservative governing model. Lower taxes, private school tax credits, skepticism toward government mandates, greater reliance on private markets. If Tedford wants to take that business philosophy to Congress, apply a test any businessman should understand. Measure the results. On wages, Tedford has explained his philosophy. He hosted a legislative study examining living wage laws. He warned that mandated increases can reduce entry-level jobs, limit hiring, and hurt small businesses. His preferred alternatives were workforce development, tax credits, skills training, and market-driven wage growth. But if market forces are working, eventually the results should appear in Oklahoma paychecks. Oklahoma median household income is $65,039. The national median is $80,734. That is a gap of $15,695 a year. Oklahoma poverty is 14.9%, compared with 10.6% nationally. Tedford argues that skills and productivity are better ways to raise wages than government mandates. Fair enough. Then the congressional question becomes this. What specifically would Tedford do to close Oklahoma's $15,695 household income gap, and how long should voters wait before deciding whether the strategy worked? Tedford is not fairly described as simply anti-teacher or anti-public school. Before beginning his legislative career, he supported increasing teacher pay, arguing that Oklahoma could not expect to recruit the best teachers without competitive wages. He deserves credit for that. Tedford also comes from a community that provides an interesting lesson about public school investment. Jenks voters have approved 62 of the last 63 school bond issues. In the last 15 years alone, Jenks voters approved more than $446 million for classrooms, technology, textbooks, buses, and other school investments. So Tedford comes from a community that understands something important. Good public schools require public investment. But Jenks is not the only educational world in Congressional District 1. Tulsa Public Schools reports that 81% of its students are economically disadvantaged. Union Public Schools is also highly diverse, with about 29% of students classified as English learners and students speaking more than 60 languages. District 1 contains dramatically different educational realities, and a member of Congress must represent all of them. Where someone lives does not tell us what that person understands. But Tedford knows firsthand what a community can build when voters consistently invest in public schools. What would he do in Congress to give children in Tulsa, Union, and other high-poverty schools the same opportunity to succeed? That question becomes important because Tedford also voted to create Oklahoma's parental choice tax credit and later voted to expand it. For the 2026 to 2027 school year, approved applications totaled about $252.3 million for 39,629 students. Only 3,132 of 39,629 approved students were reported as having attended an Oklahoma public school during the prior semester. That is 7.9% or about 8%. The income distribution deserves attention. Of roughly $252.3 million approved, about $177.5 million, or 70.4%, went to households above $75,000. Households above $150,000 received almost $104 million. And there is no upper income cutoff. Applicants above $250,000 received more than $53 million in approved credits. This is no longer merely an argument about the phrase school choice. It is a budget decision. This is also a rural question. A tax credit can help you choose a private school only if there is a practical private school to choose. Tulsa and Oklahoma City families have numerous options. Many rural Oklahoma families do not. A statewide subsidy does not create meaningful school choice in a town where there is no second school. In many communities, the public school is not one choice among 5. It may be the only choice. Title I is the principal federal program directing additional education resources toward districts and schools serving concentrations of lower-income children. A school where children from low-income families make up at least 40% of enrollment can operate a school-wide Title I program. Recent Oklahoma reporting has put the share of public school students attending Title I eligible schools at about 60%. A separate federal funding data set lists 523,476 Oklahoma students participating in Title I programs. The two measures are not identical, but either way, this is not a fringe program. So Tedford should be asked directly. If Congress tries to move more federal education resources toward private school subsidies, how would he protect Title I's basic purpose of concentrating resources on lower-income students and high-poverty schools? And how would that policy work in rural Oklahoma communities where the public school may be the only realistic educational institution available? Oklahoma's shadow budget shows the other side of the tax cut argument. My broader estimate is approximately $1.5 billion, including major tax code spending and a separate endowment set aside related to reducing or eliminating the state income tax. The categories are not all identical, but they show priorities. Public money committed to one strategy cannot be invested somewhere else. Every businessman understands opportunity cost. Money committed to tax preferences, industry incentives, income tax reductions, and private school credits cannot simultaneously be invested in schools, health access, nutrition, childcare, or workforce development. Did Oklahoma make the right investments? Tedford's approach to Medicaid provides another example. During a discussion of Medicaid work requirements, he argued that more recipients entering employment could move from Medicaid into private insurance. One advantage he identified was higher reimbursement to providers because private insurance generally pays hospitals more than Medicaid. That could improve hospital finances. But it does not answer the patient's question. Does private insurance produce better health? The Medicaid and CHIP Payment and Access Commission says evidence on Medicaid managed care quality is scarce and mixed, with limited evidence that managed care consistently improves quality compared with traditional fee-for-service Medicaid. Private is not itself a health outcome. Efficiency should be demonstrated, not assumed. The broader American healthcare system provides an uncomfortable comparison. The OECD reports that U.S. life expectancy is 78.4 years, which is 2.7 years below the OECD average. Preventable and treatable mortality are also higher than the OECD average. If Tedford believes moving more Medicaid patients toward private coverage is better policy, voters can ask for evidence that comparable populations become healthier. Not simply that hospitals get paid more. Not simply that Medicaid enrollment falls. Not simply that government spends less. Healthier people. This is where Tedford's businessman argument should become useful. Oklahoma median household income is $65,039. The national figure is $80,734. Oklahoma remains almost $15,700 behind. On the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress, Oklahoma's 8th grade reading score was statistically lower than 42 states and jurisdictions and higher than none. In 8th grade math, Oklahoma was lower than 37 and higher than only 1. Those are not ideological rankings. They are national student assessments. The Commonwealth Fund's 2025 State Health System Performance Scorecard ranks Oklahoma 49th. Oklahoma life expectancy is 73.8 years in the latest finalized CDC state data. Mexico's latest World Bank figure is about 75 years. The years are different, so this is perspective, not an apples-to-apples scientific comparison. But 73.8 years is sobering on its own. The 7 states at the bottom of the CDC's 2022 life expectancy table were West Virginia at 72.2 years, Mississippi at 72.6, Kentucky at 73.6, Oklahoma at 73.8, Tennessee at 73.8, Alabama at 73.8, and Louisiana at 73.8. Those states are not identical. Their histories, rural populations, economies, demographics, and health problems differ. Political party alone does not explain their outcomes, and some Republican-led states perform substantially better. But the concentration at the bottom should not simply be ignored either. If lower taxes, smaller government, weaker mandates, and greater reliance on private markets are repeatedly sold as the road to prosperity, states that have followed much of that philosophy should eventually be able to show the results. Where are they? That is why Tedford's OCPA score is worth discussing, but not enough. It tells voters something about ideological consistency. It does not tell them whether an Oklahoma child can read at grade level, whether a family earns enough to buy a home, whether a rural resident can find a doctor, or whether an Oklahoman lives long enough to watch the grandchildren grow up. None of this requires deciding whether Mark Tedford is sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. That is the wrong test. Tedford has already demonstrated that he can disagree with Trump. The important thing is knowing which Mark Tedford District 1 would actually be sending to Congress. District 1 deserves answers. When Trump proposes a tariff Tedford believes could increase inflation, what does Tedford do? When Trump seeks to restrict birthright citizenship and Tedford believes that is wrong, what does Tedford do? When federal energy policy disadvantages wind and solar while Oklahoma generates enormous amounts of wind power, what does Tedford do? When Washington debates private school subsidies and Medicaid changes, what evidence will Tedford demand before voting yes? There is a simple way to find out. Mark Tedford and John Croizon should agree to at least 3 public debates before early voting begins. Not campaign rallies, not dueling television commercials, not carefully edited social media clips. Real debates. The first debate should focus on household costs and the economy, taxes, tariffs, federal spending, the national debt, and the recent federal tax and spending law. The second should focus on health and economic security, Medicaid, SNAP, Social Security, Medicare, prescription drug costs, veterans, and rural hospitals. The third should focus on Oklahoma's future, public education, Title I, community schools, private school subsidies, infrastructure, immigration, energy, data centers, and public safety. The rules should be simple: equal speaking time, real rebuttals, genuine follow-up questions, general subjects disclosed beforehand, but neither campaign approving individual questions. Every debate should be recorded and made available to the public in full. Let voters compare. Donald Trump has given Mark Tedford his endorsement. District 1 still deserves to know when Donald Trump would and would not get Mark Tedford's vote. Mark Tedford and John Croizon should agree to 3 public debates. District 1 voters deserve nothing less. Follow the money at langdon.substack.com.